Chicago, the summer of 1893. Along the lakefront stood a city of nearly 200 buildings, painted a blinding white, and after dark it burned with something close to 100,000 incandescent lamps. People travelled across oceans to stand in that light. Then, within 18 months, it was gone. The official record is tidy about this. The buildings were temporary, framed in wood and coated in a plaster called staff, never meant to last a single winter. The lamps were leased, the generators hauled away, the wonder dismantled on schedule. A fair explanation. It answers almost everything. Almost. Because in those same years, a quieter machine was spreading through every city that kept its lights. The electric meter, the small dial that decided light was no longer something you simply had, but something you were charged for by the unit and metered to the last flicker. Let me sit with that meter for a moment, because it is the pivot of everything that follows. The consensus history of the world's Columbian Exposition is not a cover story. It is well documented and, on its own terms, entirely convincing. The fairgrounds were engineered by Daniel Burnham as a deliberately temporary spectacle. Nobody hid this. The buildings were designed to come down. That plaster skin, staff, was jute fibre and cement smeared over wooden frames. It cracked in cold, sagged in rain, and was never load-bearing in any permanent sense. Most historians agree the White City could not have survived a Chicago winter intact, even if anyone had wanted it to. That much is simply true. And the lighting was leased. Westinghouse underbid Edison to power the fair with alternating current, strung nearly 100,000 bulbs across the grounds, and dismantled the whole apparatus when the contract ended. A demonstration, paid for, delivered, removed. There is nothing mysterious in a demonstration ending on time. So most people, hearing all this, feel the question close. The lights went out because the lease ran out. The buildings vanished because they were made to. I understand that instinct completely, and for years I shared it. The trouble is one small detail of timing. The meter came first. Oliver Shallenberger patented his induction meter for Westinghouse in 1888, 5 years before the fair opened. The device that measured alternating current and therefore made it billable existed before the great public demonstration of alternating current ever lit a single fairground bulb. The instrument of charging arrived ahead of the wonder it would eventually charge for. Now, an ordinary reading of that sequence is perfectly reasonable. You build the meter before you sell the service, the way you build a cash register before you open the shop. Commerce needs its instruments ready. I want to be honest that this is probably all it is, but hold the shape of it in your mind for a moment, because the same shape keeps appearing. Consider Samuel Insull, Edison's former secretary, who took over Chicago Edison in 1892 and built the model that every electric utility on Earth would eventually copy. His genius was not generation. It was the meter, the rate structure, the idea that light should be sold by measured demand. Insull's insight, and it was a real and brilliant one, was that a utility makes its money not by selling more light, but by controlling how light is counted. He pioneered demand-based pricing, the two-part tariff, the whole architecture by which the flow of electricity became a metered stream you rented rather than a thing you owned outright. I want to be careful here. Insull was not a villain in the documented record. He electrified the American Midwest and brought power to farms that would have waited decades otherwise. But notice what his system required structurally to exist at all. It required that light stop being free. It required the meter between you and the current. And here is where the theory I am tracing begins to whisper. One reading of this history, and I emphasize it is only a reading, is that the crucial invention of the electrical age was never the bulb or the generator. It was the meter, the thing that converted an abundance into a scarcity you could be billed for. You feel the difference, don't you? A generator produces, a meter permits. One creates light, the other stands at the door and decides how much of it reaches you and at what price, and stops the moment you fall behind. The entire industry organized itself around the second machine, not the first. Let me bring in the figure the theory cannot resist, and let me be scrupulous about what is real. Nikola Tesla did, in fact, attempt to build a system of wireless power transmission. Wardenclyffe Tower rose on Long Island beginning in 1901. It was real. Its foundations are still there. That is documented fact. What Tesla actually proposed is more subtle than the legend. He believed he could transmit power through the Earth and its atmosphere without wires, delivering signals and, he hoped, usable energy to receivers anywhere. He spoke of tapping the environment itself. Whether the physics could ever have worked is genuinely disputed among engineers to this day. The tower was never finished. J.P. Morgan, his principal financier, withdrew support around 1903. The structure sat idle for years and was demolished in 1917. Its metal reportedly sold for scrap during wartime. This is the sequence historians record, and there is no honest way around most of it. Tesla failed, and he failed largely for money. The mainstream explanation is clean and probably correct. Morgan lost faith because Tesla could not demonstrate a working product, kept expanding the scope, and burned through capital. Investors abandon projects that don't deliver. It happens constantly. There is no need to reach for anything darker to explain a bankrupt inventor and an impatient bank. But there is one line, attributed to Tesla and repeated often, that the theory clings to, so let me flag it honestly. Tesla claimed Morgan asked how, if power were transmitted freely through the air, one would put a meter on it and collect payment. I cannot verify those exact words were ever spoken. Treat it as legend, not evidence. Still, the underlying logic of the objection is sound whether Morgan said it or not. A system that delivers energy without wires is a system with nowhere to attach a meter, and a financier whose entire model depends on metered delivery has an obvious, rational, entirely non-conspiratorial reason to prefer the wired grid. Self-interest needs no secret meeting. That is the quiet turn the theory makes, and I want you to watch it carefully, because it is doing something clever. It does not claim a villain twirling a moustache. It claims that the meter, as a business model, simply could not coexist with free transmission, and that the wired metered system won not because it was better, but because it was billable. Now the pattern widens, and it stays entirely inside the world we have already entered. The World's Fairs did not stop with Chicago. Buffalo lit the Pan American Exposition in 1901, drawing power from Niagara Falls, its electric tower blazing with tens of thousands of bulbs. St. Louis followed in 1904, San Francisco in 1915, each a temporary city of impossible light, and each one vanished on schedule. The theory notices this rhythm and asks a question I find hard to fully dismiss. Why did the age that gave us permanent skyscrapers, permanent bridges, permanent everything, keep building these vast, luminous cities and then demolishing every one of them within a year or two, again and again? The documented answer is, once more, reasonable. Fairs were temporary by law and by budget. The land was leased, the staff construction was cheap, precisely because it was disposable. Cities could not afford to maintain acres of ornamental plaster palaces after the crowds left. So the palaces came down. Economics, not suppression. I concede that this explanation carries real weight. Temporary architecture is a genuine, well-understood tradition, and the fairs were extravagant loss leaders that no municipality wanted to keep heating and repairing. If you stopped the story here, you would be on firm historical ground, and most careful people do stop here. But the accumulation is what unsettles me. Not any single fair, not any single meter, not any single bankrupt inventor. It is the way the same silhouette recurs, abundant light, publicly displayed, then removed. And in the surrounding years, always, the quiet installation of the instrument that made ordinary light a metered, rented, billable thing. The theory's boldest claim, and I present it as a claim, not a finding, is that these are not separate events, that the fairs were the last visible glimpses of a mode of light we were meant to forget, and the meter was the mechanism by which forgetting was made profitable and eventually made total. Which brings us to the hardest problem the theory has to face, and to its credit, it faces it. For any suppression on this scale to be real, thousands of engineers, financiers, city officials and utility men across competing nations and hostile companies would have had to keep a single secret. That is a staggering, almost impossible demand. Edison and Westinghouse despised each other. They fought the current war in public, with lawsuits and grim publicity stunts. The idea that these rivals secretly coordinated to bury free energy collapses the moment you look at how bitterly they competed. Real enmity is very hard to fake for that long, across that many people. So the theory, in its more sophisticated form, abandons the idea of a coordinated conspiracy entirely. And this is the version I find genuinely difficult to refute, because it asks for no secret at all. It suggests the silence organized itself, the way water finds its level, through nothing more than shared institutional interest. Consider how that would work without a single meeting. Every utility, competitor or not, profits from metered delivery. Every financier prefers assets that generate recurring, measurable revenue. Every regulator finds a metered grid easier to tax and oversee. No one has to conspire. Each actor, pursuing ordinary self-interest, arrives independently at the same preference. And a technology that threatens that preference, a mode of light that cannot be metered, does not need to be actively destroyed. It simply never gets funded. It never gets the patent defended, the follow-up capital, the second demonstration. It dies of neglect, which looks nothing like murder and leaves no fingerprints, because there were none to leave. That, I think, is the theory at its most disquieting, because it does not require you to believe anyone was evil. It only requires you to believe that a system optimized for metering will, over time, quietly starve whatever cannot be metered and call the result progress. And systems do behave that way. We have watched them do it. Let me pump the brakes hard because intellectual honesty demands it. There is no documented evidence that free, ambient, meterless energy was ever actually available to any 19th century city. Tesla's wireless power was never demonstrated at scale and may have been physically impossible. The fairs were lit by ordinary, wired, entirely conventional generators. That last point matters enormously, and the theory tends to skip past it. The White City's 100,000 bulbs were fed by coal-burning dynamos, the same technology that would go on to power the metered grid. The light was not free at the fair. Somebody paid Westinghouse handsomely for every kilowatt. This is not a small hole, it is the central one. So if you are looking for a verdict, here is mine, offered plainly. The documented facts do not establish that free energy existed and was suppressed. They establish something narrower and, to me, still strange, that our entire relationship with light was reorganized in a single generation around the instrument that meters it rather than the machine that makes it. That reorganization is real. The meter did arrive before the great demonstrations. Insull did build an empire on measured scarcity rather than abundance. Tesla did dream of wireless transmission and did lose his funding to a man whose fortune depended on wires. Each fact is genuine. It is only the thread connecting them that is speculation, and I want you to hold that thread loosely. Because here is what I keep returning to, though I would rather not. Look at the meter on your own home tonight, the small dial or the glowing digital counter, and notice how completely you have accepted it. Notice that you have never once questioned whether light should be counted. That acceptance is so total, it has become invisible. And ask yourself, not as an accusation, but as a genuine question, what it would even look like if a form of abundance had been quietly converted into a form of scarcity a century before you were born. Would there be a smoking document, or would there just be a dial on your wall, and a bill each month, and no memory of anything else? I do not know the answer. I want to say that clearly, because this is a theory and nothing more, one possible reading of a set of real facts that almost certainly have duller explanations, and you should weigh it for yourself and feel free to set it down. The evidence for suppression is absent. The strangeness of the pattern is not. The White City burned white for 18 months and then was gone, and we tell ourselves it was only ever plaster and lease agreements, and that is very likely the whole truth. But the meter it arrived beside is still here, still counting, still standing quietly between you and the light, and it has never once been asked to explain itself.